Done.
Okay, so let's wait some minutes until the people will connect. No, we have a good number of participants, Malak. So now it's more than 170, but it's more, so there are more. Okay, maybe 2 more minutes and then we shall start, okay?
We have no more than 200.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's excellent. Okay, so dear colleagues, let's start, okay? Mahmoud, we are starting. We are about to start.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Good morning, dear colleagues. Salam alaikum, sabah al-khair. Marhaba, welcome to our webinar on what we call post-COVID teacher professional development, because we hope, of course, to be sometimes post-COVID. This period over the last 2 years has been, of course, very difficult for everybody, but especially for teachers in all education systems. We know what they experienced. We had many of these webinars, conferences, studies about teachers' challenges, but we wanted to go a little bit more in depth in the Arab region, because in this region, countries are different, and they all made great efforts to face the challenges and to support teachers with this new environment, learning environment, and all these new working conditions. However, despite of the efforts, teachers are still facing challenges with regard to using technology, but also to dealing with learning loss and dealing with this missing part of the schooling environment that is actually so helpful in developing social skills. And as we know from different studies, what both teachers and students missed maybe the most during these 2 years was the real interaction, the face-to-face interaction. So all these ideas, they prompt us to actually think of a study about what helped teachers overcome these challenges, and to look into the role of teacher professional development during these difficult times. What changed and what should change, actually. So UNESCO office in Beirut commissioned this study on post-COVID teacher professional development in the Arab region to a well-known international expert, Dr. Malak Zalouk, welcome, who's from Egypt, and she's working with American University in Cairo. She's leading an institute for Middle Eastern studies, and she has a great experience in teacher development and education and teacher related issues. So Dr. Malak, in some 2 minutes, in a couple of minutes, will present the outcomes of this study, which is a pilot study. So it's not, so to say, a fully fledged study. It's a rather qualitative study in only 5 countries of the Arab region. We try to look into countries from different sub-regions, so that to have an overview of what happens in different parts of the Arab region. The study needs, of course, to be improved. And after the presentation of Dr. Malak, we will listen also to several commentators that will think about how the study relates to their own work and what else needs to be added and how the study could be maybe enriched so that its outcomes can feed policy development in the Arab region with regard to teacher professional development. I will give the floor in a minute to Dr. Malak Zalouk. Before that, I want just to welcome all of you in this workshop. We are almost 280 participants. Marhaba again, and we hope to have an interesting discussion. We have to stop the webinar at 12:30 sharp because we have other activities today, but we hope to have time enough. Your questions and comments, please share them in writing in Arabic or English as you want, and we will get back to you during the open session. My colleague Noor Osta from our office will help me to summarize these questions and then get back to Dr. Malak and to our commentators. I will introduce the commentators a little bit later. You will also, those who want would be able to receive certificates. Given your email address was actually correct, and we don't get bounced back with these certificates. And we will also share documents during this discussion. So in the chat function, we will share the report, this pilot study report. And again, the information about the webinar and the agenda, so that those of you who did not have a chance to look at those documents can do it now. So, and we will repeat several times this sharing of documents. If we don't answer all your questions, or if we cannot address all your comments today, we will do it through the webinar report. And we will also talk at the end of this webinar about the follow-up. So this being said, I invite Dr. Malak for half an hour to share the outcomes of this pilot study about the role of teacher professional development in the Arab countries, what changed and what could change based on the promising practices that we could identify. So Dr. Malak, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dakmara. And let me first start by saying Assalamu alaikum وبسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أنا سعيدة جدا لوجودي معكم في هذا اللقاء الهام جدا، ويسعدني أني أكون طرف في تفكير واهتمام المعلمين في التنمية المهنية المستدامة وكذلك في عملهم الجليل جدا. I will turn into English because this report was actually want to say that if there will be some conversations in Arabic or comments, questions, I would be more than happy to engage in Arabic and respond in Arabic. First, let me start by reiterating the fact that this is a pilot study and there was a selection of 5 countries in the region to represent the sub-regions, Mashriq, Maghreb, and the Nile Valley and the Gulf area. The study, you will, in the table of contents of the study, it was divided into these parts, as you can see, an introduction. There was quite a lot on the context, the challenges, also what were the promising teacher professional development practices that we picked up, and finally, conclusions and recommendations. And I feel extremely proud to represent teacher voices in their own recommendations and what they saw as the future. I would like to start by acknowledging the wonderful focal persons who supported this study, my assistant as well at the Middle East Institute for Higher Education at AUC. I'd like to thank all the participants that joined this study, that made it possible in all the 5 countries that we organized the sessions in. Let me start first by way of introduction, by suggesting that, of course, this pandemic was global. It touched upon huge amounts of people, 1.6 billion primary and secondary age children and their families. And the negative impact was reported to be, unfortunately, more pronounced in the Arab region. And this study is an attempt to actually catch a closer glimpse of what was happening in those countries. This is a pilot study. It's an empirical and involved desk review as well. And in the empirical part, it was largely a qualitative study that captured the challenges teachers faced in Egypt, Jordan, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Morocco, and Tunisia. It also captured what innovative responses were put forward by teachers who were so dedicated and did brilliant work, and how can they be supported, and what would be forward-looking strategies to enhance teacher professional development. We managed to get a total of 50 professionals who were approached, teachers from primary, preparatory, and secondary schools, inspectors, mentors, officials from the Ministry of Education for professional development, as well as members from training institutions and faculties of education.
Yes, Dr. Malak, just a second. Would you like to share your presentation? Because we cannot see it yet.
Oh, I thought this was already shared.
No. So
oh,
you have to share your screen.
Okay, I thought I had done that, but looks like
yeah, we did it as a rehearsal, but not now.
Oh, excuse me. Let me see how I cannot see my own screen right now for some reason. Is there a reason why I can't?
You have to press share screen first.
No, I'm looking at the, okay, there we go. Right, sorry about that. So here we go. Let me make sure that it is now visible. Is it visible now?
Yes, and if you can also enlarge.
Yes, I will do that immediately. My apologies. I thought I had done it, but okay. So I'm just going to rush through the first parts, and that's exactly what I was mentioning in terms of the table of contents and the broad introduction to the whole study. And I guess I mentioned the acknowledgements, thanking my assistant Lamia Eid at the Middle East Institute and all the focal persons in the different countries. I also reiterated the fact that this is a pilot qualitative study that captures the challenges that were happening in all these countries, Egypt, Jordan, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Morocco, and Tunisia, and what innovative responses they were able to present, as well as their forward strategies. And as quickly mentioned, there were 50 professionals who were approached, a mix of primary, preparatory, and secondary schools inspectors, mentors, officials from the Ministry of Education, and those in charge of professional development, as well as members from training institutions and faculties of education. The study had quite a rich part on context in all these 5 countries, trying to pick up what each of the countries managed to put in place in terms of digital solutions, in terms of traditional, non-traditional solutions to mitigate the impact of the pandemic. What is clear is that the playing field was not level. That is, we had inequities. When the pandemic kicked in, countries were not on the same par necessarily, nor were the regions within the countries, largely speaking here of urban and rural regions. But generally, from all the information obtained on the context, it's clear that all countries managed to provide a mix of technological solutions, both traditional and innovative, to confront the situations. And they all, without exception, and here I'm speaking of both global, regional, and the countries in question, all faced challenges. Now, what were the challenges that were highlighted largely by those that were part of the study? So all of them agreed there was internet weakness or absence, sometimes whether in the government institutions or in households. There was the issue of digital illiteracy. People had not been prepared, they were taken by surprise. Not all of them were prepared for that. Of course, at times there was inefficiency in the information sharing in a timely manner. And so the communication was not forthcoming, which made it hard for teachers to know what was available. Also, the high level of centralization and bureaucracy often stopped teachers from being innovative and autonomous. Inspectors and supervisors, were not always having at their fingertips the convenient digital platforms that could be tailored at their district level, at the decentralized level. Also, all of them had everywhere, of course, all over the world, but in our study, it was clear that there was extended working time for everyone and general fatigue, definitely. Burnout became a very common syndrome, and people were thinking to drop out of the profession because it had been so hard at times. Sometimes in households, equipment was being shared amongst many family members. For example, telephones or even telephones, iPhones were being shared by head of households and everyone else, which made it sometimes difficult for students to have access. Homes were oftentimes not well equipped with space and or equipment to host home learning. Even in the richest of countries, this was happening everywhere. Again, there was a sense of loss of privacy and the risk of losing personal data as teachers were using their personal edifices and telephones for teaching and for their profession. There was a serious challenge, of course, with conducting online exams and evaluations. Teachers felt that this was not sufficiently accurate and it was not really reflecting the true level of what these students had achieved. And a lot of the systems were exam driven. There was a lot of focus on that. So teachers were saying, and most complained about the weak assessment systems in place. Teachers had not been trained sufficiently to be able to assess the learning loss once the children were back in classrooms. So what were the gaps that they had to handle? Again, most teachers, as Dagmara was saying, were very sad that they no longer had face-to-face interaction with students. This was a big challenge. There was a challenge with the students who also were deprived of their extracurricular activities in most situations. There was a general sense of psychological vulnerability. Again, teachers in particular and other stakeholders needed psychosocial support. Students, again, had not been trained to be self-learners with much autonomy in most situations. In their own pedagogy, they hadn't learned to depend on their own selves. And the systems, again, were not always based on active learning. This was particularly a challenge for the primary stage where little children needed a lot of scaffolding and support and were not able to practice self-learning or access technology easily. Again, there was another challenge which manifested itself in the resistance to the use of technology. This was a big challenge in all the countries. Professional professional development, mentorship and guidance was very hard to actually implement during those dire and difficult times. And the large training workshops were oftentimes deemed as ineffective and not sustainable. Many complaints came from the population under study about the weak use of foreign languages. It is those that mastered foreign languages who were able to access resources, who were able to practice self-learning. And some of the technology offered by the official responsible ministries and institutions were sometimes far too heavy and complex for the novice participants who were trying to juggle with all of this. And some complained that their curriculum had not been renewed for the last 20 years, which made it exceedingly difficult to cover and also to turn into technological provision. And none of the countries actually was able to do accelerated learning, which is usually quite necessary during emergency situations to thin the curriculum and move on to accelerated learning. Now, despite all these challenges, it has to be said, quite honestly, that behind everything that was happening were heroines and heroes who, despite all the complex challenges confronted, the education authorities, the teachers, the supervisors, the communities in all these countries performed heroic acts and ensured some continuity in learning. So what were the promising professional development practices that seemed to emerge? These were divided into 4 types. So the first type was really indulging in self-learning. Some of the teachers had managed to teach themselves how to use their social media applications for teaching. A lot of them used their smartphones, the WhatsApp applications, Messenger, and Facebook to communicate with their pupils. And they really innovated, practices. They sent summaries of lessons, photos of explanations, exercises, and instructions, and very often managed to interact with those children. Also, there seemed to be, as I mentioned earlier, a positive correlation between those that mastered foreign languages, English in particular, and their ability to self-learn effectively. So we saw this in Morocco, where people who mastered English very well were able to be part of international projects where they became fluent in the use of technology and were therefore able to communicate with their students. Again, we saw that in Egypt, a number of teachers were able to get around the challenges by producing video recordings that they shared with their colleagues and supported each other. Again, in Jordan, we saw how some of the teachers were able to indulge in gamification, which was so attractive to young children, particularly games like Kahoot and others. And they had managed to self-learn and managed even to get students to do extracurricular activities online. Again, Tunisian teachers who were fluent in English were able to self-learn and became quite fluent through MOOCs to use Google Classrooms as well as Microsoft Teams. Then there was another modality of professional development, which seemed promising, and that was the large-scale institutional support and sometimes medium-scale institutional support. Very remarkable efforts were made in Saudi Arabia on the large-scale level, and it had been happening apparently for quite a long time. So they had a head start, and this was quite visible in how they managed the situation. Another successful large-scale undertaking was the one offered by the Queen Rania Teacher Academy, and hopefully we will hear some more about this from a dear colleague who will be speaking on behalf of QRTA. Still in Jordan, we were able to see how universities were able to handle practicum and student-teacher training and field work was developed during the pandemic through technological applications. They borrowed from UK applications such as Avatar, etc., and they were able to do virtual classrooms where the students were able to get some training for their practice. And we're hoping that this will enlarge and that this can be done on a bigger scale. Another good practice happened in Tunisia, this time in a medium scale support at the district level. It was interesting that the more decentralized, the more the situation was managed and handled by district supervisor, the more effective it seemed to be and the more engaged were teachers. So that was a call for decentralization. A third type was through collaborative efforts. In Morocco, there was a very interesting collaborative effort that happened in the very hard to reach areas where there was no internet connection. And teachers managed to work with community members and with parents and with the district to actually create summaries of the lessons, print them out, photocopy them, bring them to the homes of the teachers, of the students, and manage to continue their teaching. In Egypt, there was a remarkable also initiative alongside the 2.0 reform now happening in Egypt since 2017. There was a very significant project that really worked on school and university partnerships, which created peer communities of learners between university and schools and within each of these institutions. And these were able to support each other even during the pandemic, to help each other out, to learn more about technologies, to learn more about best practices. And already, even before the pandemic, this type of partnership had shown huge results in terms of good pedagogical practices. In Tunisia, also, peer communities of learners and supervisors and teachers collaborated, particularly for the beginning teachers on the district level. And again, this showed some very good results on how teachers and other educators could come together and really support each other in a peer methodology for learning. Fourthly, there were quite a few innovations that are worth picking up and scaling. For example, in Tunisia, and I thought that was rather brilliant, a supervisor for primary education had managed to do an empirical study on Google Form during the pandemic because he was very keen to understand the needs. So needs assessment is so important, and tailoring professional development to teachers' voices and needs and building on what they knew how to do best. This is a practice that needs to be enlarged. Another innovation that looked at Moroccan teachers who were also becoming very clever at doing what they called video capsules, in which they created model classes and shared them first informally through social media and YouTube voluntarily, and then it got picked up by the districts in a more formalized fashion. In Egypt, springing from the initial school-university partnership, there is an ongoing strong, it's become a national initiative now, where the schools and universities need to join hands and need to create partnerships. And now the Middle East Institute for Higher Education and the new Cairo district, educational district, are in partnership. And there were amazing innovations of how teachers managed to use technology to mitigate the shortages in teachers and the numbers of teachers. Because they had such a big shortage, the expert teachers were able to run simultaneously through support from the private sector schools a number of classrooms. So they got resources from the private sector and managed to run several classrooms simultaneously in order to meet the challenge of teacher shortages. So what were the teachers telling us, and the supervisors and the participants in this study? They had two sets of recommendations. Some were system-wide recommendations and some were largely focused on professional development. So for the system-wide recommendations, what everyone seemed to agree on, that there was a need for more decentralization. The more professional development and the more the system was closer to the ground, to the local context, in fact, being school-based was the best, the better off we were. So decentralization was a must. Everyone suggested that there was a need to have proper training on assessment, particularly that now everyone was back in school. Teachers needed to have the tools to assess the education loss, to understand what the gaps were, and to do a lot more formative assessment for their students. Relationships between parents and communities required more attention to the parents, but also training teachers on how to handle parents. A lot of them spoke about the joy of learning and how school had to regain its center position in the various districts in all the countries we studied to bring about cultural enrichment and the joy of learning, that school could become a cultural hub as well. Curriculum was another one where it needed to be less dense, particularly that now they had to catch up, and there needed to be more room for practice and for interaction and for learning. Again, the pedagogies in schools and in university needed to emphasize self-learning. Teachers, this was a big one. Teachers felt their voices need to be increasingly heard, not just at the school level, but also at the district and at the national level for policy formulation. Partnerships were critical, particularly between schools and communities and parents, but also with the private sector and private schooling who were well-resourced and could support these other schools. Everyone agreed that it was so important we have emergency planning at all the levels, including at the school level. Everyone said we never again want to be taken by surprise. On the professional development level, everyone agreed that teachers and all stakeholders needed much more training on technology and technologically enhanced learning. They also requested training on how to bring about mentorship and coaching at the school level and at all levels. And they wanted to educate parents as well. It was important to design professional development for parents who are now our close partners, educating their children at home. We needed to raise the awareness of communities. This was also a request. Collaborative learning was very much appreciated by all the teachers. Even though they did this informally, it was important to be able to do this systemically as well. They felt that they needed to model active learning in professional development. So training itself had to be active so that it would lead to activity-based learning. And all of them asked for pedagogical boards and committees to be reinstated in schools so that pedagogy became important again. And quite a few suggested, especially in overcrowded classrooms, that classroom management was an area where teachers needed a lot more attention and support and training. And of course, student-centered pedagogies needed to be well established and reinstated. Particularly the professional supporters or the people in charge of professional development, as well as teachers as well, requested there be a legal framework that would allow professional development to be mandatory and in fact to be part of contracting teachers, so that there would be a certain amount of hours that would be devoted to professional development as being their right. So to ensure, however, bringing this to a closure, to ensure continuous professional development and its success, it is so critical that when we design professional development, it should be done by the beneficiaries themselves. They at least need to be part and parcel of how the design takes place. So teachers and educators in schools need to be engaged with supervisors and other officials to design the professional development. This can be done through action research, getting teachers and educators engaged in their schools to figure out what are the best strategies that work best for them and the children. And once they are able to do that, and to better define the needed professional strategies, they could, through their action research, test them on the ground and finally document the ones that work for broader dissemination. I think these were by and large the main recommendations, the main highlights. Of course, the study has a lot more detail. Again, as Dagmara was mentioning, it can, of course, be enriched. But I do look forward to a second phase when teachers become more our partners in the research, are able to themselves document and research what are the best practices that work in their classrooms and how they were supported in doing that so that these can be shared widely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shukran, Dr. Malak. This has been a snapshot of the study, as Dr. Malak said, because the study is really worth reading. I've shared it several times on the chat function. It's in English for now, but we want next year to translate it. When the study is getting, of course, enriched, also based on the comments of today's participants. We could talk endlessly about teachers and the challenges they face and what works to support them, including in this fascinating area of teacher professional development. To comment a little bit now today on this study, we invited several distinguished colleagues who are our partners in the region for long. We asked them kindly to think about the outcomes of the study from their perspectives and to share with us some ideas, some thoughts about what is relevant from the study to their own work. So what rings a bell with regard to their own area of work, how the study could be enriched. Maybe we missed out something very important, or we could really focus more on some issues. What other experience are worth presenting, because again, this is a study focusing, a pilot study focusing on 5 countries, but the Arab region is much broader. Then also what can be said about the promising practices that could inform scaling up and policy development, because what we always try to do in such webinars and with such studies is to learn about promising policies and practices. What can we learn from one another, what can inspire us, and what can be used to enrich our knowledge and our way of also improving policies in the region that then lead to effective practices. So I will first give the floor to our distinguished colleague from UNESCO's headquarters, Mrs. Florence Cereo, who's working with the teacher section in the division for support on policy and lifelong learning. So Florence, if you are with us, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, yes. And sorry, Florence, before you start, I forgot to mention to the participants, dear participants, if you need to switch to either English or Arabic, you can use the interpretation function, and you have just to select the language of your choice and then mute the original language. Several participants, they asked about listening to Arabic, and we tried to respond in writing, but now I have a chance before Florence to make this announcement to all of us. So thank you very much, and Florence, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dagmara. I hope I can be.
You have to unmute yourself.
I am unmuted from myself.
We cannot hear you.
Oh, okay.
I'm hearing
Yes.
her. I'm hearing
Yes,
her.
okay.
I can hear her. I can hear her also.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dagmara. And thank you very much, Dr. Zalouk, for this impressive case study. It's so rich. I must admit, I have not had all the time to read in detail and carefully the different aspects. But nevertheless, when I read it through, and listening to you, some things came to my mind that I would like to share. The first one is that teachers, the studies show that teachers' transformation, professional transformation is both at personal level and at a collective level. So the creativity, the challenge, the nature of the challenges that you have brought out from the different countries show that the creativity or the challenges, the way the teachers adopted and tried to cope in the middle of the COVID crisis needed both personal efforts, personal ways of trying to do their professional work, and also collectively as peers, how to support and how to help each other. So this sheds a new light on how initial teacher training or teacher motivation and support has to be repackaged. So this is one point. The second point is the lifelong learning mindset of the teachers. So they became lifelong learners. The challenges made them adopt or have a different look at themselves as individual practitioners, but also as teachers, as part of a collective profession. So lifelong learning mindset became a source of motivation to tackle the challenges of remote learning, of blended pedagogical approaches, which teacher training programs have to look at. The third point, that learning and teaching is a collective endeavor. The learning, the teaching, the curriculum, the assessment, they cannot be detached from each other. They are pieces that need to be connected all the time. And the study challenges have shown that this is not always the case. There is less focus perhaps on assessment, and there is more focus maybe on pedagogies. There is perhaps more emphasis on bringing maybe it came out in the recommendation, reinstating pedagogical centers in the schools. The question is, should we reinstate pedagogical centers, or teach preparation must change, must be packaged differently? The coverage on pedagogy, on combining different pedagogical tools to deliver education or to support learning in different settings using hybrid modes, face-to-face learning, online, virtual. So all of these have become so evident that have to inform teacher training programs. This study is very useful contribution to revisiting initial teacher training, the content of initial teacher training, and ongoing teacher training programs. What do they target? What do they focus on? The importance of knowing more and going deeper into the learning styles of the learner. Today, the learning styles of the learner, but also the learning styles of the teacher. To be a long life learner, teachers learn best based on sharing experiences of their peers. So the collective approach, collective teaching, collaborative learning, but also collaborative teaching. But how do you do collaborative teaching when teachers are considered subject specialists? So maybe new area for analysis is how to organize teaching and learning so that collaborative teaching is possible. If learning is packaged strictly in subject areas, does that mean, for example, teachers of mathematics will teach collaboratively? How about the interaction between mathematics teachers and maybe chemistry teachers or physics teachers? So how to do that? How can teachers be empowered, prepared to learn, to teach collaboratively at the same time, to learn as individuals, to be lifelong learners, which also means that schools should be lifelong learning communities where everybody is learning. Teachers learn through their teaching practice, but also through other ways. Learners also learn. So how can the schools be transformed, the post-pandemic schools or learning settings be lifelong learning communities where everybody is learning, from the school principal to the teacher, the teaching staff, the non-teaching staff, how it can be a collaborative endeavor with parents, with the communities, how to do that. This requires a new mindset, thinking out of the box. So the creativity going beyond the creativity that the study has revealed. At the same time, avoiding to fall into the trap of too much generalization, because even though there are some commonalities, the countries have specificities. So how can we draw on common challenges or common difficulties while we at the same time address the specificities, being specific at the same time being collective? That requires comparative perspective, comparative, which this study has focused on. It has been comparative analysis of 5 countries, which perhaps could be scaled up, like you have already said, next year, to cover more countries in the region and to go beyond the region, maybe with similar studies through our collaboration with the UNESCO Beirut office, maybe to go beyond the Arab region to see what could be the lessons from the other regions that could inspire and enrich the creativity that has been revealed. So the post-pandemic teacher training has to be revisited, has to be packaged in a way that empowers teachers not only to be implementers of the curriculum, but it has come out clearly that they are also policymakers. Teachers are policymakers even in the classroom when they make decisions what to teach, when to teach, how to teach. And then, but they are more than that. They are policymakers, or they should participate in policy-making process, but they are also, they engage with learners. So they facilitate learning. So the teaching profession, the profile of the teacher has to be revisited, redefined to tackle and to take into account what the case study has revealed. Now, the post-pandemic teacher, forward-looking, maybe a forward-looking training program, a forward-looking teacher training. We know that teachers are trained, and if they remain in the teaching profession, teaching for 30 years or teaching for 50 years or 40 years before they retire, then the training has to be forward-looking, because the generation of the students change, the context in which they teach change, educational goals change, so which requires that the continuous professional development of teachers have to be systematized, have to be packaged, have to be adequately financed, and has to go on throughout the career of the teacher till they retire. But how could this be possible? Maybe there are models out there from different regions in different countries that it's already happening. The pandemic has made it very obvious, very evident that teachers need to be supported. They need to be prepared adequately for all situations and for all contexts. So that requires a change of policy mindset, a change of parents' mindset, a change in packaging everything. So at the level of UNESCO, we have the ILO UNESCO recommendations, the 1966 recommendations. And these recommendations talk about the status of the teaching profession. Now, one of the recommendations that Dr. Zalou brought out is perhaps to regulate teachers' professional development, to make it compulsory, to professionalize all the teaching personnel. Yes, so there is already an existing normative instrument that UNESCO uses and promotes its use or advise countries to use is the 1966 recommendations, the ILO UNESCO recommendations on the teaching profession, and the 1997 recommendations that UNESCO sponsored on the status of higher education teaching personnel. These are normative instruments, and some countries have teaching councils. Some countries have teaching commissions. The roles of these teaching councils or teaching commissions is precisely to regulate the teaching profession, to professionalize the teaching personnel, and to continuously monitor their performance, their professional standard, their professional performance throughout the career. So depending on the countries of the case study, perhaps furthering this study could look into countries or map out countries around the globe with the support of our section that have different models of regulating the teaching profession. You have the teacher policy, okay, but to implement teacher policies, you need instruments. So perhaps the teaching councils or teaching commissions or whatever the name could be instruments that can be used to regulate the teaching profession to ensure that the teachers perform and they stay quality teachers throughout their career as teachers across the system.
Florence,
from early
Florence, sorry, can you please wrap up so that we have time also for the other. Thank you very much for your very interesting contribution. And please, if you can wrap up in 2 minutes.
Yes, in 2 minutes. So to calibrate the new mindset that is needed, the case studies is making an important contribution. Within the region, general commonalities, but in the countries, specificities. And this, to unpack this and to go forward, these studies, type of studies are very important because we don't want to get lost in generalities, to respect the specificities of the countries, but at the same time to benefit from forward-looking practices around the world. Thank you very much. And I hope that we'll be able to take this study forward and continue the discussion in the futures to come. Thank you very much, Fatmara. Over.
Shukran, dear Florence, and sorry for me interrupting you, but we have to also keep in mind that we need to finish the webinar at 12:30. We'll listen to Florence, who's very experienced with this global perspective on teachers, and I take from her presentation especially this idea to enrich the study with models of regulating teacher professional development in different parts of the world, including in the Arab countries, because we have also in our region, we have experiences of regulating teacher professional development. Another very important point Florence made was about this change of mindset and the changes that are needed to repackage actually teacher professional development following our experiences with the COVID-19 crisis. So thank you, Florence, once more. I will now pass the floor to Mr. Moritz Bilager from UNRWA. He's the acting education director of UNRWA, and they also, as you may know, most of you, they put in place a very impressive system of teacher support that is looking into ways of empowering teachers, including to continuous professional development. And I'm sure they have a lot to also share with regard to their COVID-19 pandemic experience. So Moritz, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dagmara, for this kind words, and great thanks in general to UNESCO Beirut for setting up this excellent webinar and taking this initiative for this study. Thanks a lot also to Florence. It's really great to hear a true specialist on teacher education. And of course, thanks to the researcher. Just a few comments from my side, and I will do my very best to stay within the 5-minute limit. I did read the reports. I thought it was like a very interesting, contribution, pioneering in a certain way, because it's really an emergent thing that we don't know, so much about. How do we think about teacher professional development post-pandemic? I have to say that having read the report and having seen the presentation, I thought that the presentation was actually, and sorry, I mean almost like stronger than the reports. It really laid out some of the main points, and I think if one could look at the report from the point of view of the presentation, I think it might help put a few accents in the right place. The report, however, of course, has got a very clear structure, and I think what makes this report so interesting and what makes it strong is that you, Dr. Zalouk, really gathered a lot of strong cases, good practices from these different countries. And that, I think, is really the core and the essence of the report. But as a consequence, I think what one then wonders is, okay, but what is, let's say, the common denominator? I mean, there are, of course, all of these different things that happen in Egypt. You highlight very good practice in Jordan, where the UNRWA education headquarters is located. But one or two things that I was wondering about is, then of course we go to the the conclusions and recommendations. But my question here is, okay, we go from some kind of like cases to, let's say, an overall picture, but are all of these conclusions and all of these recommendations equally valid across those 5 countries, which are extremely different? Of course, it's very difficult to compare Morocco to Saudi Arabia, to compare Jordan to Tunisia. So in terms of just presentation in the report, in terms of, I'd almost say, research design, I wondered a little bit, as it were, how valid it is. And I understand, of course, why you would do that, because your research approach was greatly qualitative. But my question to you, and I don't know whether there's time for this kind of like questions and answers, is really whether you'd, in hindsight, would also have liked to apply like at least a few quantitative techniques. And I say that because, for example, at the bottom of page 21, you mentioned a very interesting study, which I believe was done by the researcher Chebi in 2020 for Tunisia. And this researcher did apparently apply a survey or some quantitative methods, and then comes up with a more overarching pictures. I thought the recommendations were very interesting, very rich, very diverse in nature. And my question would be, to whom are they addressed? And if you could maybe touch upon that, that would be very good. However, as said, my main comment, or one of my 2 main comments, would be that really the study seems to switch a little bit between this like case study approach versus it wants to help us understand something on a greater, higher level picture level. And I wonder whether there are some tensions. But my second comment, or overarching comment, I guess, is that it seems that this study, and that is again its richness, it is very concrete. You really give concrete examples that can then also be used concretely, and I think that's a great strength. However, I wonder whether in hindsight you would also choose to strengthen the theoretical part a little bit. And with theoretical, I don't mean a theory that's detached from the concrete or from the practice, but the conceptual. For example, on page number 16, you go into this issue of teacher identity. And, you know, I as a reader would like to know more about this, you know, issue issue of teacher identity and how has the pandemic affected this, you know, self-understanding of teachers. So, I mean, I'd almost say like the study wouldn't, it wouldn't be bad for the study to become like almost like a little bit more wishy-washy, and sorry for that expression, which is probably not well chosen. And that really is about this, you know, like relation between the abstract and the, you know, and the concrete. I noticed that a lot of the study focuses on technology. And when I was reading the study, I wondered whether, you know, the study pretends to be like one big story or a collection of many small stories. I had the feeling that it was rather many small stories than one big overarching narrative. But if there was one bigger story, it seems to have been, you know, like a study around technology. And I wonder whether you'd like to identify that yourself as a red thread going throughout the study. Finally, one thing that I found very interesting is that, you know, of course, the study was about teachers, but actually a lot of what you say is really focusing on the education system as a whole. You speak about the homes, you speak about the students, you speak about the parents, you speak about policymakers, etc. And that's in the written report. And, you know, of course, in the presentation, you really focus more on teachers, but so I think that's very interesting. So you put the teachers into the systemic environment, let's say in their ecosystem. And I wondered whether, you know, going forward, and if you like to scale up the study, you'd like to do something more with the concept of system resilience. You know, how resilient is the system against external shocks? Because also in your presentation, you said we never want to be taken again by surprise. Of course, the essence of a surprise is that you don't know it's coming, you don't know what it's going to look like. But how can we make the system more resilient to external shocks? And how can teachers play a part in that? And then more specifically, how can TPD play a part in making teachers and as a consequence, the system more resilient against external shocks? And that really goes to the question about concepts. I promise to keep it short, so I will now wrap it up. Just one very last question, and that really goes to the last thing I said just now. On page 14, I found this really interesting comment about how this crisis made the existence of some, I think you call them weaknesses, but of course we should be very careful with words such as weaknesses, but let's say maybe challenges visible, and that is this use of rote learning. So I wonder whether you could also do something around saying that, well, this crisis actually made some already existing challenges in the system visible, and therefore we can actually use the current situation as an opportunity to address them. And then it might look as if we're addressing this crisis, but in reality, we are addressing some challenges that exist in the system anyway. I hope that my comments are clear and helpful. Thanks very much again for this opportunity. And I give the floor back over to you, Dagmara.
Yes, shukran, dear Moritz. Thank you very, very much for these comments. And I will just pick maybe pick up 2 or 3 of your suggestions and your comments. One was about this tension you are identifying between the concrete and the general, or the specific and the general, and between this case study dimension of the study and of course more general recommendations that are common for the region. And we acknowledge these tensions, and we'll try next year, when we try to improve the study, to do a follow-up approach to take this study into approach, maybe also through, as you recommended, through some quantitative kind of focuses. I want also to raise this issue about technology, the focus on technology. And I want just very quickly to mention that UNESCO is dealing with a similar study on teachers' competencies and the usage of technologies. The study is focused on African countries, but we are in discussion also about the Arab region. So we can, I think, quite easily to actually add to the study also a quantitative dimension with the help of our colleagues in headquarters and in our region and in African countries. And then what you also mentioned was this dimension related to the system and the fact that a lot of what is said in the study with regard to teachers is also relevant for system-wide strengthening. And we'll try to make this clearer, of course, in the next steps, during these next steps related to the study. The teacher identity issue is also, I think, very important, and we should look more into that. So thanks for this suggestion as well, because it's really worth thinking of how teachers are seeing themselves in these new conditions. And we know that in many countries, teachers, they thought even leaving the profession because they felt they are not supported enough and they cannot face the challenges that are suddenly actually in an abrupt way confronting them in different ways. So thank you very much, dear Moritz. I will ask Dr. Malak to get back to you with her comments at the end. And now we will listen to Mr. Mohammed Al-Najjar from Jordan, from the Queen Rania Teach Academy. Please, Dr. Najjar, in like 5 to 7 minutes to share your comments, your ideas with regard to the study and to teacher professional development post-pandemic in general. So shukran.
Thank you, Dr. Mara, and I would thank also Dr. Malak for this opportunity. I will move to practical things. We are in Queen Rania Teacher Academy, which is an independent non-profit organization committed to empowering educators and to support them with the needed skills to excel in their schools and their classrooms. Actually, we thought of the challenge of COVID-19 as an opportunity, since we deal with two kinds of training for teachers and novice teachers. We deal with in-service teacher training and pre-service teacher training. The biggest challenge was actually moving into virtual training, is how we could help teachers apply what is learned in our workshops and sessions, which is the core component of our training. And we call this a school experience. We thought of micro-teaching, which provides a safe and controlled environment in which educators receive immediate specific feedback through a coach model of learning. We try to enhance confidence and develop the critical self-reflection in our trainees. Also, we thought of helping teachers to assess their own classroom management and instructional strategies and to improve their interpersonal skills. So the first answer that we try to provide to deal with the different challenges we have in COVID-19 period was the micro-teaching. Another tool we used to overcome this challenge was using simulation. And I mean by this, virtual reality simulations, where educators and novice teachers interact with avatars. And we mean by avatars, they are electronic images that represent and they are manipulated by a computer user, like what we have in computer games. This helped us to provide real-time teaching and challenging situations for our trainees. And we have great feedback from our, what we call students teachers, as they responded to different challenges in this kind of spontaneous and dynamic interaction with learners. Simulation training really empowered our teachers to virtually rehearse challenging classroom skills and strategies like behavior management, providing differentiating instructional content before applying them in real classroom settings. You know, with the closure, we didn't have the chance to go to schools and have real interaction with the students in the field. So the simulation was like a good answer for this question. Also, the simulation helped us to develop the interpersonal skills that the educators need to experience when they go into their profession and they go into their career. So it provided us with a unique blend of artificial and human intelligence. Another challenge we faced during the COVID-19 crisis is how we can keep the trainees engaged and keep them informed. We thought to answer this challenge in two ways. The first one was through the interactive live sessions, which was really helpful in many ways. One of them is we tried to train them to teach online and to use new digital applications and to help them to plan and manage virtual classroom. This will help them really, and when they go to the classroom and they have this kind of virtual teaching for their students. So we modeled this in our interactive live sessions. The second way we helped our trainees, we used rich and scaffolded synchronous activities where they learn by themselves and prepare their questions and prepare their challenges that they brought to us in our, as I said, interactive live sessions. Another way we try to help our trainees, our teachers in the field, is to build active community of practice among our trainees. And by this, we try to build the culture of professional learning communities. And this will help our trainees to rely on each other. And this is part of our plan to keep our teachers in their lifelong track. And again, the challenge now changed to be an opportunity using different tools, different platforms. Also, to end with this, I would say that we focused on using social media like WhatsApp, like Facebook. These simple tools help us to keep the communication with our teachers continuous and also focused to overcome, the sense of loneliness and provide the needed help and support to our trainees in the field. Again, thank you, Dr. Dakmara. These are the tips and these are the really tools we use during the crisis to help our teachers. And again, thank you, Dr. Malak, for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Najjar, for this very interesting contribution. We learned quite a lot, and I like to pick up on 2 or 3 of your comments and suggestions. One wonderful addition to our discussion is this linkages that we need to consider between pre-service and in-service teacher preparation and continuous development, because they are linked. We said in the introduction of the study that the study is looking more into continuous professional development, but we are fully aware that we should also approach what happens in pre-service, in teacher education, the initial part of teacher preparation. Then you mentioned the linkages between artificial intelligence and human intelligence, and I think we have to look more into this aspect as discussions are becoming more kind of important about the usage of artificial intelligence, but also the limitations of artificial intelligence and how to use it in a careful and ethical manner. Then you gave us very concrete examples of how teachers can be trained, as you very nicely said at the end, how they can be taken out of their isolation and become part of some collective endeavors. And the word collective also resonates from what Florence mentioned in her intervention. So you ended up with this very important request your reply to actually develop a culture of professional learning communities. And I think we are all part of this exercise of how to share more, how to be part of such long-term and lifelong learning communities. So shukran, that was excellent. And before giving the floor back to Malak, we are happy to invite Dr. Abdul Salam Al-Jufi, Senior Advisor for ABEX, the Arab Bureau of Education for the Gulf States, to share his comments. And I ask him also to wrap up a little bit all this session of commentators. Dr. Al-Jufi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Dr. Maran. Thank you for Malak and to my colleagues. In fact, very pleased to see you, friends, with us, and Moritz and Muhammad. And in fact, I will change to Arabic. Just let's me. Okay. الواقع انه انا سعيد جدا بانه ان يظهر هذا العمل في وقت مهم. نحن في مكتب التربيه العربيه دول الخليج انجزنا تقرير حول حالة التعليم عن بعد في دول الخليج العربية والتعاون مع الOECD، والتقرير جاهز وسوف يصدر خلال هذا الأسبوع باللغتين العربية والإنجليزية، وهو يتكلم عن حالة التعليم وليس عن حالة المعلمين. وكنت الحقيقة متشوق لأن أعرف الدكتورة ملاك وأعرف قدراتها وأعرف إمكانياتها وأعرف أهمية الموضوع، وبالتالي كنت أيضا سعيد جدا بأنه يعني أن أكون ضمن هذا اللقاء هذا اليوم. الواقع بأنه هناك صحيح لا يمكن فصل موضوع البيئة التعليمية ومكونات البيئة التعليمية عن قضايا المعلمين وتدريب المعلمين، لكن لابد من إبراز موضوع التدريب بشكل أكبر وخاصة في المقدمة. وأنا لاحظت أن الدكتورة ملاك يعني من حماسها ركزت كثير على البيئة التعليمية وعلى الوسائل وعلى جهود الدول، وأنا أدرك أيضا حساسية الدول العربية في موضوع المقارنات وموضوع أيضا يعني العمل المقارن. وعليه أنا أميل إلى التالي: أولاً أن نركز كثير على قضايا تدريب المعلمين، وبالإمكان تقسيم القضية إلى قضيتين: قبل الخدمة وبعد الخدمة، أو أثناء الخدمة، قبل الخدمة وأثناء الخدمة، وهذا أيضاً ما ذكر الزملاء. أيضاً أن نركز بشكل أكبر في عملنا ليس على ما قبل كوفيد-19، بل على ما حدث أثناء كوفيد-19 وما يجب أن يكون ما بعده. يعني ننسى قضية ما قبل كوفيد-19، لأن هناك الحقيقة كوفيد-19 بالنسبة لنا أصبح مرحلة مفصلية من العمل التربوي والتعليمي، سواء كان في الفلسفة التعليمية، سواء كان في البيداغوجيا، سواء كان في الممارسات، سواء كان في التطبيقات، سواء كان أيضا في التوجهات. وبالتالي علينا أن نركز كثيرا على ما حدث أثناء الأزمة وما سيحدث ما بعدها، لأن هناك انفصام تام. الموضوع الثاني: أدرك تماماً أن قدرات الدول مختلفة، وأن مشكلات الدول مختلفة، وأن آليات معالجتها مختلفة، وبالتالي صعب عمل المقارنات. لذا أميل دائماً إلى عمل أمر مختلف، أن أتحدث عن دولة واحدة في كل محور من المحاور. عندما أتكلم على التعليم المجتمعي، أو أتكلم على التعلم بالابتكار، أو التعلم التعاوني، أمسك دولة واحدة فقط وأتحدث عنها لكي أتجنب قضية المقارنات الحساسية في المنطقة العربية، وفي نفس الوقت أمارس هنا جهد أكبر أركزه على الدولة. وايضا في نفس الوقت اختار تجربه او ممارسه دوليه فضلى في هذا المجال. يعني مثلا اذا عندي ممارسه مدرستي في المملكه العربيه السعوديه، او قضايا تدريب المعلمين، عفوا قضايا تدريب المعلمين في المملكه العربيه السعوديه او في واحده من دول الخليج، في نفس الوقت احيل هذا الى ما يضاهي من تجربه مثلى في دوله عالميه وليس في دوله عربيه، بحيث انه ابين ماذا يجب علينا ان نكون. ثانيا عند الاختيار، نتيجه التنوع الموجود في المنطقه العربيه كما يعرف الجميع، المنطقه العربيه يعني ممكن نقسمها، دائما انا اقول نقسمها الى 5 مناطق. مناطق دول الخليج العربيه، وهذه عندها يعني امكانيات وعندها قدرات وعندها ايضا يعني خطط تعتبر ناضجه، وعندها جهود كبيره في مجال تطوير التعليم، وايضا وفي مجال تطوير المعلمين على وجه الخصوص، تطوير المهني للمعلمين، وهناك الرخصه المهنيه موجوده الان في اغلب دول الخليج، وهناك دول تعاني من ازمات في الدول العربيه، وهؤلاء ايضا عندهم اشكاليات كبيره واشكاليات متعدده، وبالتالي مشكلاتهم مختلفه. انا لا يمكن ان اقارن دوله مثل اليمن بدوله مثل السعوديه او مثل قطر او مثل البحرين او مثل الاردن وغيرها، وبالتالي لابد ان اقارن ما يحدث في اليمن بما يحدث في سوريا وما يحدث في ليبيا، بحيث انه يكون في حاجه مشتركه بنفس الكيفيه في بقيه العناصر. الموضوع الثاني، التوجهات التربوية الجديدة الآن تتكلم إلى العملية التكاملية. أنا كنت أتمنى أن أرى جهود المعلمين أو جهود التدريب أو جهود التكوين المهني للمعلمين في ستيم على سبيل المثال، باعتباره توجه جديد بيتكلم على توجه كلي، باعتباره أيضا مربوط تقنية. نحن لاحظوا أن نحن استمرينا عشرات السنين، أنا يعني حوالي 15 أو 20 سنة نتكلم على الفصل المقلوب، ولم ننجح به كثيرا، لكن عندما أتت الجائحة تحولنا جميعا إلى الفصل المقلوب وأصبحت الأسرة، وبالتالي أيضا المشاركة المجتمعية، أيضا الدور المجتمعي، الدور الداعم المجتمعي. أنا هنا أتكلم ليس على العملية التعليمية، لكن على الدور المجتمعي في دعم المعلمين، في دعم العملية التربوية والتعليم، في دعم المعلمين، في دعم اللي هو إتمام العملية التربوية. ثالثا وقضية غاية في الأهمية هي قضية التقييم. الحقيقة كثير من المشكلات التي واجهت المعلمين هي قضية أساسية، هي قضية اللي هو قلة أو ندرة 3 قضايا. أولاً أن التعليم الحادث أثناء الأزمة هو تعليم مختلف، وبالتالي لا يمكن أن ندرسه باختلاف الوسيلة فقط، بما معنى أدرس درس تقليدي لكن باستخدام اللي هو الزوم أو باستخدام التيمز أو باستخدام التلفزيون. لابد أن ندرب المعلمين على طرق جديدة لتحضير الدروس، بما معنى أن الدرس لا يمكن أن يكون 45 دقيقة، لا يمكن أن يكون بالطريقة التقليدية. وفي نفس الوقت أيضا التحدي الثاني طريقة التمايز والتعليم المتمايز ومراعاة الفروق الفردية. لا بد أن يكون هناك، أنا كنت أتمنى أن أرى أمثلة تعالج مثل هذه القضايا. الثالث هو التقييم. مشكلة التقويم مشكلة حقيقية. نحن لا نعلم تماما ما هي الأمثلة الجيدة سواء في المنطقة العربية أو في العالم التي بالإمكان أن تكون نموذجاً نقتدي به ونتعلم منه ويكون هو المستقبل، لأنه المستقبل سيكون المستقبل هو ما نبني عليه اليوم. أنا أعتقد جازماً مرة أخرى على أن العقلية الجديدة للتعليم هي التعلم، وسواء التعلم بالمختلف المجالات اللي ذكرتها الدكتورة ملك، وإذا أيضا ركز عليها زملائنا عندما تحدثوا عليها، على كيفية إعداد المعلمين، على تعلم الأقران، على مجال التنظيم التعليم والتعلم، على أيضا التعليم التعاوني، بما معنى أنه يعني هي هذه المجالات التي يجب أن نركز عليها. لكن لابد أن نبرز جهود بعض الدول وليس جميع الدول، سواء كان في الآن أو حتى في الدراسة المستقبلية، لأن كما علمت الآن أو كما فهمت من كلام دكتور مارا وأيضا كلام الدكتورة ملك أنه هذه دراسة ممتدة، بما معنى أنه سيكون لها جزء ثاني وجزء ثالث. إذن هذا أتمنى أن نرى شيء يتحدث على تعليم ما قبل الخدمة، تعليم ما بعد الخدمة، تعليم على المكونات العملية التربوية التعليمية نفسها، إعداد الدرس، كيف تتعامل تجارب في دولة معينة في الدروس أو في تقديم الدروس، كيف يتم أيضا عملية التمايز، مراعاة ذول. أيضا عندنا مشكلة ظهرت لنا، تعليم وتعلم الأطفال في الحلقة الأولى والحلقة الثانية من التعليم الابتدائي. تعلم الأطفال أو التلاميذ ذوي الإعاقة. هل كان هناك برامج تدريبية للمعلمين حول مراعاة هذه، حول التعامل مع هذه الحالات الخاصة؟ ثانيا والأهم هو التقويم التربوي وتقييم الأداء وأيضا الإشراف التربوي. هذا لأنه أيضا الإشراف التربوي هو جزء من التكوين المهني، لأنه أيضا الآن عندنا المعلمين بيتدربوا يعني هناك جهود فردية، وأنا لاحظت أنا ذكرت الدكتورة ملاك جهود فردية ممتازة سواء كان في تونس أو في المغرب أو في غيرها من الدول أو في مصر، بما معنى أنه هناك جهود فردية قام بها المعلمين يجب أن نبرزها، نعم، لكن أيضا كيف نتعلم منها، بما معنى أنه هنا لابد من وجود بلاتفورم واسع مفتوح بالإمكان المعلمين، ويمكن اليونسكو بيروت عندهم موقع ومنصة بالإمكان أيضا أن نساهم في الإعلام على التجارب الناجحة في الدول والمبادرات الناجحة من المعلمين والمعلمات في مختلف الوطن العربي، وهي كثيرة الحقيقة. وهذا سيؤدي إلى ليس فقط إلى تعلم أقران، ولكن أيضا إلى إشهار وإبراز التجارب الناجحة التي بالإمكان التعلم منها. أيضا الرخص المهنية. أنا الآن موضوع المعلمين ليس موضوع تدريب فقط، ولكنه أيضا موضوع اعتراف، موضوع أيضا تقدير، موضوع تحفيز. أنا لم أرى ربط واضح بالعنصرين هذولا في التحفيز في التحفيز على التطوير. لأنه ماذا يحفزني كمعلم؟ إن أنا أطور من نفسي. ماذا يحفزني كمعلم؟ أن أكون مختلفا عن المعلم الآخر، أو أن أكون مختلفا عن الأمس، أن تكون دروسي مختلفة، أن يكون فيها إبداع، أن يكون فيها أن يكون فيها عمل جديد، أن يكون فيها أيضا قدرة جديدة على التطوير، وعلى أيضا إبراز الدرس بطريقة مختلفة، بطريقة مبدعة، بطريقة أيضا أكثر جدوى. مرة أخرى سيظل التدريب غاية في الأهمية، وأنا أعتقد بأنه هذا موضوع غاية في الأهمية. نحن نتكلم على التدريب، ما معنى نتكلم على تعلم مستمر، نتكلم على أن المعلمين لابد أن نحفزهم أن يكون لديهم القابلية والرغبة والتوجان وروح المبادرة إلى أن يقوموا بعملية التعلم المستمر من خلال العناصر التي قالتها الدكتورة ملاك، من خلال أيضا الخيارات المنفتحة، الخيارات المتعددة، من خلال أيضا تحفيزهم، من خلال أيضا أنه إشراف تربوي يؤدي إلى الاعتراف وإبراز الجهود المتميزة للمعلمين والمعلمات. أنا أعتقد أنه النقاط التي ذكرتها ليست جميعها من عندي، لكنها كانت أيضا من وحي ما قالها الزملاء، من وحي أيضا التقرير الرائع التي كتبتها الدكتورة ملاك. وأنا أتمنى أيضا أنه من خلال الأسئلة أنا متأكد أنه كثير من المعلمين سيسألوا لماذا تم اختيار هذه الدول على وجه الخصوص؟ ما هي محددات اختيار هذه الدول؟ لماذا برزت تجارب في دول ولم تبرز في تجارب في دول أخرى؟ لذلك تجنبا لذلك أنا أرى أن يكون هناك عبر المحاور نبرز تجربة في محور، بدل أن يكون تتكرر إبراز تجارب في دول على حساب دول أخرى، لأنه حساسية المنطقة. ثانيا أنا أعرف أنا قصة المعلومات ومشكلة تحديات المعلومات، وتحديات أيضا هو تفاعل أيضا القطاع، أعرف أنا التحدي هذا لأنه أعاني منه كثيرا. لكن أيضا كيونسكو بيروت مسؤول على التعليم في المنطقة العربية كاملة، لابد أن يكون هناك دول من دول الأزمات، لابد أن يكون هناك دولة من دول الخليج، لابد أن يكون دولة من دول المغرب العربي، لابد أيضا من الدول اللي هو الحوض البحر المتوسط، وبالتالي بحيث أنه يكون جميع المناطق قد تم معالجتها. أنا متأكد أنه مهما قيل، لكن هو لا يقلل اطلاقا من العمل الكبير، العمل الجيد، الجرأة عند الدكتورة ملاك دائما أنها تخوض في مناطق لأول مرة. يعني كوفيد ما لش إلا سنتين، والمراجع التي رجعت لها اغلبها تقريبا حوالي 80%، حصيلتها حوالي 80 او 85%، كلها مراجع 20 21. ال 50 الفرد الذي تعاملت معهم من خلال المناطق ايضا يعني كان امر جيد. انما يعني هناك مواطن ايضا بالامكان ايضا ان تؤدي الى تحسين العمل، مش هذا العمل فقط ولكن ايضا في مرحلتها القادمه. شكرا جزيلا دكمارا لاعطائي الفرصه، واتمنى ان تكون مشاركتي ايجابيه. شكرا دكتوره ملاك.
Yes, thank you very much. شكرا Dr. Jufi. I hope we are all in agreement to maybe continue for 15 more minutes. So to end up the webinar at 1:45 o'clock. So to give also some time, Dr. Malak, to get back to the previous speakers, to the commentators, with some quick answers. I just want very quickly to pick up some of the points Dr. Al-Jufi made. For instance, this importance of looking the future, not necessarily of practices that happened before the COVID crisis, using also international experiences. And here I want to clarify, Dr. Al-Jufi and dear colleagues, that the study is not a comparative study. So we did not initiate the study in order to make comparisons among countries, but to identify issues. That's why we call it a pilot study. And we selected Arab countries that had good experiences to show, that had documents in English and Arabic that could help us with their networks to identify teachers and respondents, teacher trainers. So we were aware that we cannot in this pilot study cover the whole region. But again, it's not a comparative study. We just wanted to use this study to have a clearer idea about the issues, and then to see how a study of this nature can be enriched with quantitative dimensions and with the different suggestions that have been made today. Also taking into account, as Dr. Al-Jufi mentioned rightly, the diversity of the region, of the Arab region. Also very thankful, Dr. Jufi, for your focus on teacher motivation and the linkages between teacher professional development and teacher motivation and encouragement and appreciation and incentives. For the platform, I just want to say and how to take advantage of these promising practices. UNESCO office in Beirut is also working to expand next year this sharing of collective information based on good practices. We will launch actually next year a process of collecting these promising practices in a more systematic way. And this will be done in cooperation with Arab Thought Foundation. So I want also, before giving the floor for a wrap up to Dr. Malak, to quickly summarize some of the comments and questions our participants made during this 1.5 hours. For instance, one suggestion was that giving the importance of self-learning for teachers, we may maybe think of developing self-learning guides or some tools for teachers to be more effective in their self-learning, including resources and ways to proceed for self-learning into an effective manner. Then this collecting promising practices aspect that I just mentioned, as UNESCO office in Beirut will definitely work on that and will collaborate with our partners in the region. Another suggestion was to look not only into how teachers master new technologies, but also what is the effectiveness of teacher investment in more traditional technologies like radios and TVs. Then the issue brought up also by Dr. Al-Najjar about artificial intelligence, and to focus more on the usages, the potential of artificial intelligence, but also its dangers, and how to keep a humanistic approach in teaching and learning. Then one question, Dr. Malak, was also about whether the study looked into different levels of teaching and learning. And if you could identify some important differences, for instance, between teachers of primary education and secondary education, or if that has been approached in the study. And a final suggestion that is also to be taken into account for next steps is the linkages between teacher professional development and the teacher status, how teacher professional development could actually improve teacher status. So thank you very much again to all your contributions. And before asking Dr. Malak to respond, I see Dr. Abdul Salam Al-Jufi raised his hand. So Dr. Al-Jufi.
Yes, yes. Just I forgot to mention. Thank you, thank you very much. I just forget to mention that last week the JAR conference just adopt the SKT, which is, I mean, the scale for teacher training. We were part of that scale. I mean, the negotiation of the of building of the scale, and I think it's very, very important. This will recognize the certificates for teacher trainings. This, I mean, classify the teacher training to different, I mean, skills, and according to the certificates, I mean, the person hard, according to the hours. Also, I think, I mean, this is a kind of systematic the work of, I mean, teacher training and recognitions of the need and the importance of teacher trainings. And I think, I mean, this is very, very important. And thanks you, Dr. as well, to hold this meeting before the teacher international task force meeting will be held next week in Kigali, Brunei. Thank you very much.
Shukran, Dr. Al-Jufi. Indeed, there are several events coming up in the near future, including the International Task Force for Teachers on Education 2030. This is regular event coming up this year in December, the beginning of December, and it will be hybrid. So it will happen in presence in Kigali and then also online. So there will be also a special session dedicated to the Arab region. Then, as said, there will be a continuation of the study. We'll meet with all the experts that joined us today, and we'll think of a way to continue enriching the study and to look into relevant issues. So we will keep the participants informed, and we will also send the certificates of attendance. And again, thank you, dear colleagues, for your time, for your dedication, for the interesting comments, because we will save all this and they will be used for the report of this webinar. So now the floor is back to you, Dr. Malak. You have maybe 5 minutes to wrap up before we part.
Oh my goodness,
Yes.
5 minutes, wow,
Yeah.
for all of this. Okay, let me go very fast. I will actually try to pick seminal points for each of the interventions. Let me start with Ms. Florence Serro, who her comments were music to my ear. I really thank her, and I totally agree with everything that she may have commented on. And I do believe that, yes, lifelong learning mentality and mindset is so important. And also I just want to comment on one little point mentioned on collaborative and integrated teaching and learning, which is something that was part of one of the experiences mentioned in the study, that there was a PCL, or a peer community of learners, that supported math teachers, specialized teachers, to teach because they had worked so much together collaboratively. So yes, indeed, having, going away from different silos and getting teachers to work together is what made the innovation quite successful with the particular math teacher I had mentioned. Going very rapidly to Mr. Moritz from UNRWA. I really want to focus on two things very rapidly. I hope you realize that there was a framework for this study that was both time-bound and in words. So it was 6 to 8 weeks in which all this was covered, and in addition to 6,000 to 8,000 words in which all this was covered. Now, obviously, being an academician and someone who publishes quite a bit on issues of theoretical debate, this is definitely was not the place for theoretical debates. I am, however, extremely interested in teacher identity, and I highlight teacher identity as part of the reason why these teachers, I have done some research, quantitative, in fact, on teacher identity, and it has shown that unlike what we believe in many situations, there is a firm teacher identity who are on mission, who are professionals, who understand their role, and who will go the extra mile for doing what it needs to be done to promote children's learning. Yes, there's a lot of room for theoretical debates, but this is not the place for it, I'm afraid. Also on issues of system resilience, yes, indeed, we should be looking at that. And that is why, Mr. Jufi, we would need a specific study on, professional development in situations of emergency. Not that COVID was not an emergency, but here we need to look at the background and the long-winded emergencies as a backdrop against which COVID arrived, which means that we do need to look at background. We do need to look at pre-COVID situations to understand the differences between countries and the context in which COVID arrived. So yes, we need a specific study on those. I could not agree more. On motivation, the study actually does voice what teachers had to say. I perfectly agree with you, Mr. Jufi. We need more on teacher status and a systemic approach. As you well know, this was the work that was done with the League of Arab States in the past, which was a systemic approach looking at teacher professional development pre and in service, putting it within a broader systemic framework, understanding how this relates to status and motivation. And I remember you being part also of this grand initiative at the League of Arab States and others. But in this particular study, teachers did speak about the need for incentivization and the need for them to be further motivated, even though they were doing a heroic job of mitigating the situation. They did speak up to that, and they did speak up to, and I don't really like using training. I normally talk about professional development. For teachers, it's professional development and education. And so they really were very keen on being motivated, being supported, being encouraged and appreciated for what they were doing. There's a lot more we can do, obviously. This was a snapshot. This was a 6 to 8 week glimpse of what some countries were able to do, only to enlighten us on what we can do more of, obviously. As Dagmara was saying, it was not meant to be a comparative study. It was an exploratory pilot study to understand a little more what some good professional practices were that we can trace further and that we can look more in depth into. Thank you all. These were very enriching comments. I look forward to pursuing this both in my own academic interests as well as future UNESCO partnerships. Thank you so much.
Shukran, Dr. Malak. And with that being said, we'll close this webinar for now. Unfortunately, in our office, we have another meeting at 1 o'clock, so we cannot stay for a debrief with the consultants and with the commentators. But I'll get back to you later on to ask for a separate meeting. So dear participants, thank you very, very much. We'll also have the recording of this session on YouTube in a couple of days. I'll get the link and then I'll place it on the website of our office in UNESCO office in Beirut. We'll try to, again, make justice to all your comments and your questions. We had an important number of participants. We tried to, of course, take into account all the suggestions also of our dear commentators. Very well taken, and we take note of all the shortcomings of the study. But again, what we wanted to achieve for this moment was to get an idea of how we can learn about teachers' needs, about the different promising practices that help teachers develop their capacities, and how teacher professional development can be improved based on learning from one another and from all these different initiatives that Dr. Malak and also our dear commentators try to summarize. And thanks again for this very interesting discussion that opens up new avenues. And I always like to be in sessions where people have sparkling ideas and they think of what is missing, what could be added, because this is the basis of us learning throughout our lives. So I think the way this discussion happened was a clear example of how people can proceed with lifelong learning and with a lot of enthusiasm, and to try to improve things in an area that is dear to our hearts. So thank you very much, and see you next time. We'll also launch some invitations next week. On the 29th, there will be a webinar on on formative assessment, and I recall Dr. Al-Jouf is mentioning about the role of assessment. And then on the 30th of November, there will be a webinar to see more about what happens with curriculum in this post-pandemic era, and what kind of curriculum. And I have to also thank Dr. Al-Joufi for his focus, for his suggestion to focus not only on teacher professional development, but also on what teachers have to do, how they deal with curriculum, with assessment, with dealing with parents, with the community, with the learner's need, with the psychological support, and all these very, very important parts of what constitutes teachers' mandates. So thank you very much, stay well, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Dagmara. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Malak, and thank you, everybody, and our dear commentators. It's been a great session.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello. Bonjour. Okay.